Today I'd like to tell you a story. It's based in the area around Torridon. It's somewhere where we go fairly frequently. But the last time I was up there, I went on a little cycle ride and I came across a big new plaque on the wall, which told me that the origin of the name Torridon is Viking, and it was related to a prince, an earl, called Thorfinn. And in fact, if you go up there now, you will find a B&B in Earl Thorfinn's cottage. Well, I don't know the truth about that, but it made me and one or two others start mulling over ideas of what kind of stories would be associated with Earl Thorfinn. Here's one. There is a legend that in old days, when Earl Thorfinn ruled the area we now call Wester Ross, there was a bay that very few of his men dared to enter. It was a very beautiful inlet which would have offered their longboats protection from any storm, but the men looked at the stone cliffs that surrounded the bay on three sides and concluded they must have been carved by trolls. They were so perfect. There was also a curious rock formation. The cliff jutted out over the path that deer, sheep and other animals had created, and reaching up out of the water exactly in front of it was a massive single rock with a sharp point at the top. It almost appeared to have been carved with strangely regular angles at each of three corners. The superstitious argued that this dolmen could not be natural but had been placed there by giants. It was a gateway into the kingdom of the trolls. Now, one of Thorfinn's thanes, Magnus Sigurdsson, was determined to show that this belief was nonsense. So, one midsummer's eve, he set out alone in a small boat and made his way down the fjord. It was and remains a beautiful place with high, rugged mountains climbing up from the shores, wisps of low cloud brushing their tops, golden in the setting sun. He turned the boat into the bay and looked for a place to land. The problem was that much of the shoreline was edged with large boulders. Again, the superstitious claimed this was to stop mere mortals from trespassing on ground reserved for others. However, he found a suitable spot, close to the entrance, and made the boat fast. Stepping ashore, he was surprised to hear what he thought sounded like music from across the water. He studied the water's edge and saw there were a number of small waterfalls tumbling down the cliffs. He concluded they were the source of the sound, the water tinkling off the rocks on its way down. Some of the wet rocks were also catching the last rays of the sun, giving them the appearance of flickering lights across the bay. It wasn't easy fighting his way through the thick undergrowth. There were also stands of birch and pine tree climbing up the slopes. But eventually he reached the track which led to the gate. He stood before it for several moments, studying the angles, shapes and contours of the rocks on both sides of the path. He thought that perhaps a long time before the massive stone in the water had broken off the cliff. With a shrug, he stepped forward through the gate, and suddenly the world changed. Daylight became brighter, more intense. A gentle breeze wafted the scent of beautiful flowers all round him. In front of him was a village he could have sworn you couldn't see from further out into the loch. The buildings were a mix of granite blocks at the base, with woven silver birch branches above them. The roofs were thatched with heather, and wood smoke rose from a single chimney in the middle. The people were tall and fair. The women wore dresses that seemed to shimmer with silver. The men wore fine leather tunics into which gold thread had been woven. Some were working on an elegant longship of a type and shape Magnus had never seen before. At its prow, a dragon's head soared up the challenge to the wind and sea. The music that had attracted him came from a large oak tree in the middle of the village. As he walked towards it, he could see that a young woman, sitting on a stool, was playing a small harp, known as a klarsach, and singing to a group of children on the ground at her feet. He couldn't understand the words, but he marvelled at the lilting beauty of her song. When she stopped, the children scampered away. She put down the harp, stood up and beckoned him over, saying, "Welcome, Magnus Sigurdsson, you are expected. Come join us for a midsummer feast in the Longhouse." There was already a crowd gathering. He was placed in a seat of honour at the head of the table. Everyone seemed to know him and of his exploits, and asked him to tell and retell his tales of valour. The meal itself went on for hours. He was presented with course after delicious course of fish and roast meat, sweetmeats, and fruits he'd never tasted before, all washed down with the finest ale. In the end, he was completely sated. At the end of the dinner, the tables were cleared and a new entertainment began. People sang of love and lost. They told of courage in battles long ago, of dragons and sea monsters. Magnus himself recited part of the Saga of Thorfinn, a saga yet to be completed. It was an evening he knew he would remember for the rest of his life. Eventually, his hosts drank a final toast to midsummer and to honour their guest. They led him out to another house, to a bed of the softest down, where he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. But when he awoke, he felt that something was terribly wrong. The bed was of bracken and heather which pricked his cheek. He looked around and found he was in a hovel. Someone or something was shuffling, snuffling in the far corner of the room. What he saw lying on its back was a troll. He ran out of the building. Outside, the village was nowhere to be seen. There were no people, no longship, no tree. There was a foul smell coming from the hovel behind them, like an unkept pigsty. His mind was racing, trying to understand what was happening. He was shivering, and not with the cold. He heard a sound as if the old troll was stirring, and he fled back towards the gateway rock. He ran headlong up the hill, and as he passed through the gate, Magnus Sigurdsson was instantly turned to stone, forever blocking the path. Earl Thorfinn wondered what had happened to his lieutenant. He led a search party scouring the coastline. Yeah, they found the boat, tied to a small round tree. They found a herd of small wild pigs rooting around in the bracken. They followed the path and puzzled over the strangely shaped rock which blocked it. But Magnus Sigurdsson was never seen again.